foods and the air, and to think about those future generations that are yet unborn, right? And so it's a responsibility that we have as people to make sure that we conduct ourselves in such a way that these generations into the future will be able to have the same privileges that we have, to be able to have clean water, to be able to breathe the air, and to have foods that will grow, and the seeds that will be able to regenerate and continue to feed those future generations. And so that becomes a responsibility and an obligation that we all have. So with that, I want to just give thanks for this beautiful day and this beautiful time together, and welcome you all here. So my mother, Diane, and I are coming together tonight to talk a bit about, the topic was Native women, and specifically would like to be able to talk about our Haudenosaunee women and our point of view as Haudenosaunee women in the world. And so I know that a lot of you are based in Elmira area, Corning, and we want to be able to orientate our listeners tonight to be able to think about the lands on which most of you are upon. I understand that we're streaming out to Facebook, so I know we're reaching folks who are in other areas that are not in the area that we're talking about. But as we've been invited into Corning, we want to be able to acknowledge the Seneca Nation, upon whose lands that the college is situated upon, and to be able to acknowledge the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, for which the Seneca Nation is a part of. So some of you might be entirely familiar with the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and some of you, this is the first time that you're sort of really learning about us. And that's great. So I welcome you. This is really exciting to be able to talk about our people. And with that, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy consists of 6 nations, and our nations span across what is now called New York State in sort of Western colonial settler terms, and also into Canada and around Lake Ontario. But these are traditionally our homelands. And so when you are traveling across the state, whether it's from Albany and going across over to Buffalo, you're basically traveling across the lands of the Confederacy. And so our nations, starting with the Mohawks, who we call the keeper of the Eastern Door, are traditionally in the areas from Albany going out to Herkimer and Utica. And then as you go beyond that, then you travel into the lands of the Oneidas, which are our people. And then from there, then you travel into the center of the Confederacy, which is the Onondaga Nation, who are our fire keepers for the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And then out to the lands of the Cayugas, and then out to the lands of the Senecas, who are the keepers of our Western Door. So whenever you're traveling across the state, if you can keep that in mind, you'll be able to think of our Confederacy in that way. And I'll actually show you here on my slide what that looks like. So let's see. Okay, so so if you look at the nations that I just talked about, here, you know, in the east, you have the Mohawks, the Oneidas, the Onondagas, the Cayugas, the Senecas, and then we had the Tuscaroras that came to join the Confederacy in the 1700s. And as you can see here on the end, these white lines, they continue to extend, which is a space to allow for other nations to be able to come and join us. So as we're gathered tonight and thinking about the Senecas, I like to always ask people, so wherever you are, whether you're there in the Elmira area or you're out there somewhere on Facebook kind of farther away, is to think about, where are your feet? Like physically, where are your feet? And ask yourself the question, what is the language of the land? Does that question even make sense, right? Whose land are you on, right? Because all lands across what we call Turtle Island, which is North America, those lands have been inhabited and continue to be continuously inhabited by indigenous peoples. And so now, as I just described, the New York State area and parts of southern Ontario and going around Lake Ontario, you can see that those are Haudenosaunee territories. And so we have been within this territory since time immemorial. And we have a relationship to the land here, and that has many, many stories to it, right? And so as people have come from all across the world and found themselves here within our territories, I asked the question to think about what is the language of the land, right? And because the language of the land here is matrilineal. And that's really, really important. And it's very significant for a number of reasons. When you go back and trace the roots of the Haudenosaunee people, our roots go all the way back to what we call as Sky World. And in Sky World, there was a woman, Sky Woman, who has a very, very long story. And Babatunde, you were really great in basically saying yes. In an hour's time, there is just a little bit that we can gain in our time together here. But the stories are really very long, and they're really, really very elaborate, right? And so we just want to be mindful of that. So what we're trying to do tonight is to just be able to give you a little bit of a taste, a little bit of an insight of who the Haudenosaunee people are and why our women are so essential and central to who we are as people. So when we look at our creation story, as all peoples around the world have creation stories, ours begins with a story of a woman who fell from another point out there in the world. And she came here as one of the very first beings who then has her own story of coming here, and she comes to live upon a turtle's back. And as she's there on that turtle's back, she then begins to grow the land and to be able to, she gives birth to a daughter. And this daughter then, with time, eventually gives birth to twin boys. And these twin boys are the ones who then go and create a lot of the world that we see today. So that daughter she gave birth to had passed away, and her body then went into the earth. And this is why today we call the lands Mother Earth, and is also why we call the lands Turtle Island, because Sky Woman came and landed on that turtle's back. So the two twins that began to create the world around us, one of them created human beings, who is us ultimately, right? So you can see our lineage, how it travels from another world to here, and then human beings are created. And so with that, Mom, I'm going to give you the opportunity to step in if you'd like. We're going to share tonight, share the storytelling.
Yeah, well, thank you, Michelle. Yeah, it is a very beautiful story, a very beautiful beginning as Haudenosaunee people, because as we were created, human beings, we were given instructions, and all of our people, as they began to grow, obviously carried on the instruction, but they began to forget, and great wars began to happen among our people. And I'll just move quickly into how the Confederacy came to be. For those that don't know, when our people were at a time of war, very, very terrible war, for getting our instructions, our original instructions, there was a lot of death and destruction. And one person in particular, Hiawatha, they say he was like a prophet, if you will, and he had all of his daughters murdered by an evil chief named Tadadaho. And they say that he wandered around for days, weeks, months, grieving so heavily he couldn't think clearly. And so he began to he decided to end his life. He just couldn't take the grieving anymore. And there are many different versions of this, how it's told, but they say that when he was going to throw himself in the water, when he did, the geese lifted up the water, and there was the quahog shell, the wampum shell, which that beautiful belt was made from that Michelle first had on the slide. That's our quahog shell, and all of our history is written in that manner through our treaty belts, our history. Each bead means something. So when they say Hiawatha was there grieving, he picked up the shell and he decided to start creating a ceremony, a grieving ceremony. And as he went through this process, the peacemaker, they say, came down, which was, the one of the messengers, came down to ask Hiawatha what he was doing, and Hiawatha explained to him what he was doing and how he needed to create this ceremony. And they together created this ceremony that is based out of love and forgiveness. Hiawatha had to forgive Tadadaho for this evil act. And together with Jugunsase, who was the first clan mother, they traveled to the 6 nations, each of the 5 nations, giving the messages of peace. And Tadadaho was the last one to accept this message. And that's how he became the head chief, by accepting the messages of peace through forgiveness. So that's one of our principles as Haudenosaunee people. Our principles are based out of love. And how we get to that point is through forgiveness of those that have harmed ourselves or us harming ourselves. So that's just a very brief story of how the formation of the Confederacy came to be. So there would be peace on earth. And they say that those roots go out in 4 directions. So anybody seeking peace need only trace those roots back to its source. And I believe that that's why so many different groups kind of naturally gravitate toward this area. Syracuse is the Onondaga lands. That's our capital. That's like your Washington, D.C. This was our capital of the Confederacy. So people seeking peace are drawn to this area because this is where peace was established. That's my belief. Anyways, now, Michelle, I'll turn it back over to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as we're looking through history, my mom had mentioned a woman named Jigonsase, and she was one of the people who traveled with the peacemaker. And the peacemaker is the one who brought us this message of peace that end up coming to unite all of the Haudenosaunee people under this confederacy, right? And the role that Jugun Sose came to play was she was somebody who helped to they say, calm the spirit of Tadadaho. So we had somebody who was, considered a terrorizer of the people across the lands. And so Jagon Sose, along with the peacemaker, and some people will say Hiawatha and some say Hiawatha, they came to Tadadaho, and through, the songs and the messages of peace came to comb these, what they said, that his mind was so wicked and twisted that he had snakes growing in his hair, right? And so they combed these, snakes from his hair and removed those. And they said that he had these like 7 crooks in his body, that his body was very bent over, and they were able to stand him up straight and clear his body. So some people will talk about that being like the 7 chakras within the body. And so with that, all of the nations of the Haudenosaunee end up accepting this message of peace, and the last person to hold out was Tadadaho, and this is how they helped to bring that peace to him. And so upon his acceptance, he was then also put in charge of the spiritual welfare of the Haudenosaunee people. And that was to ensure that now, after being someone who had harmed so many people, now he has to look out for the well-being of everybody, right? So there's this power of great transformation that happens in the acceptance of peace, right? And what we call our great laws of peace. And this is what the peacemaker had brought to our people, were these great laws of peace. So when all of our nations came together, it said that we buried our weapons of war underneath this white pine tree that my mom was talking about. And again, like she said, the 4 white roots travel around the world. So they're spiritual white roots that travel in all 4 directions of the earth. And it's said that anybody who wishes to seek shelter underneath this tree of peace can come and live and reside with us as Haudenosaunee. But what is required is that you accept these ways of peace, right? And so here's the tree that represents our people, the bearing of the weapons of war, and then you can see the eagle on top who watches out for all of us, and who is one to call a warning if there is some type of danger for the people. And so, with that, I think what's really important to understand is that and so I'm going to stop sharing here because I get to see everybody. So what's really important is that, people begin to understand and recognize that the Haudenosaunee were very, very influential, especially to the founding fathers. And so it was, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and George Washington, who had all spent time with the Haudenosaunee and studied us really very closely, and modeled what now you know as your government and democracy after the system of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. So as you have 3 branches of government, we also have in our governance process, we also have a 3-part system for how we make decisions among our nations and within our own nations. And so that form of decision making you can see being played out within the US system today, right? And later you would also then come to see that the women's suffrage movement was also influenced by the Haudenosaunee, because our women were very much in charge and very much behind our government, behind our economies, behind our agriculture, and we had absolute freedom and autonomy over ourselves, right? So a lot of people like to say this thing that, Haudenosaunee women were equal to men. Well, I'm going to stop everybody right there and say, well, that's actually an incorrect way of viewing it, because it's making an automatic assumption that men have a particular status that women are, of trying to be of equal status. And that's a very westernized view of the world, whereas within our worldview, Haudenosaunee women hold an elevated status within our communities because of the fact that we are life givers. We are the ones who are the progenitors of our nations, right? And so we also have this celestial connection that brings us all the way back to Sky Woman. And so our people were really very aware that the connection that women have to the earth, to our Mother Earth, and to the ability to give life is something to be protected and something to be very much respected. And so therefore, there was a lot of that respect and protection that was built around our communities. And it was also understood that women have an innate fairness in how we conduct ourselves. When you have a whole bunch of children, whether you're a mother or a grandmother or an auntie or just a woman, you always try to make sure that everybody is provided for, everybody is fed, everybody's cared for. And we take a lot more into consideration when we make decisions rather than sort of like being very quick to react, which is something that, can be sort of more typical of men and ready to fight when confronted with challenges. And so women will take into consideration, her home, the land, the children, before she would send anybody out to fight, right? And so you really, really need to upset all the women of a nation or all the women of one of our clans, right? To be so upset to decide that we're going to go fight another community or enter into war is actually our women who would decide whether or not our nations would actually go to war or not, because we understood what was at stake. So there's a lot more that's there. So as my mom had also mentioned, Jigon Sose, right, that she said that she was the first clan mother. And so our clan mothers, so she's the first woman who, accepted the message of peace. But our clan system actually is even older than the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. So it's said that the Confederacy was formed about 1,000 years ago. And so there's stories within our oral history that relate to a total solar eclipse, which happened during the ratification of our Haudenosaunee Confederacy and became a sign to the last nation to ratify this, that yes, this is the correct thing to do. But that's so, and there's folks who worked with even NASA scientists to date this solar eclipse that would have happened over our territories, and they estimate that it's about 1,000 years ago. So it's about how old our Confederacy is. And so when you think about it, we have been living under the great laws of peace continuously for the last 1,000 years. And I ask this question: where on this beautiful earth can you find a culture that's been living under laws of peace for 1,000 years, right? Centered and seated within democracy, in which the voice of all people is represented and represented by their leadership. This language sounds kind of familiar, right? I just want to say that. So you can begin to see the parallels within your government. But what I'm getting to is that our clan system actually is older than 1,000 years. And that it goes back to an early time when human beings were here on Earth and we started to experience death. And we had to find ways to organize ourselves to be able to care for one another. And it was through the dream of a young man that began the formation of our clan system. Now, this is also another sort of long story as well, but it's the first time that you see this three-part decision-making process start to come into play. And our clan system was formed, and these elder women from different families had to go down to the water in the morning and say what animal that they saw, the first animal that they saw, and also say what side of the water of a river that the animal was on, and come back and to report that. And so when she came back to report it, there was different animals that they saw. One saw a wolf, one saw a bear, one saw a turtle, right? And two women had seen a bear. And so, and both on opposite sides of the river. So these two women and the young boy had to determine where this new clan and the clan family, what side of the house, of our longhouse, they would sit, because this gave a lot of structure from this moment, from this story that I'm talking about with the young man, gave a lot of structure to the creation of our clan system and where you would sit within the longhouse and on what side of the longhouse. Because when we were losing people, it was considered that if one side of the longhouse lost family, the other side of the longhouse would come to care for that entire side of the family because they had lost somebody. Because we know what death can be like. When you lose somebody, you can't see, you can't hear, you can't speak, right? You can hardly take care of yourself. So the other side would come to tend to them. But through that, these elder women who we come to know as our clan mothers are the ones who have really been the leaders of within our communities since a very, very early time in human history. So you can see then how, this clan system of clan mothers, led our people through throughout the years. And then when our Haudenosaunee Confederacy was formed, then was the creation of our chiefs. So you had a sisterhood and a brotherhood of leaders from our communities that came together. And as it, as we've been told, is that the clan mothers are really in charge of an entire clan family. So she is the clan mother. She is the one who takes care of the well-being of the family, making sure that everybody's tended to. She oversees the distribution of food, and food really is our economy, right? So we live in this capitalistic society, and we think of, our economies as this, buying and selling and trading of all this stuff. But in reality, when you really boil it down to it, it's what is our food sources? How do we sustain ourselves? And that's really what was centered within our system, is that these clan mothers, and sometimes even referred to early on as corn mothers, were the ones who were in charge of that distribution of food. And it had nothing to do with based on your skill the amount of time and labor that you gave, but everybody is equally provided for. So if you have 5 kids, you and your 5 kids are all going to be able to eat as much as the person who has 1 child or no children, right? And within the system that we live in, there's huge inequities based on the amount of money you have. It has nothing to do with how many people you have to take care of. But within our system and our way, everybody was always provided for. And so we actually have a teaching that's called one dish, one spoon, which is if one eats, we all eat. And if there isn't anything, then none of us eat, right? So that's what we try to do, is we try to make sure everybody's always provided for and taken care of. And so that's very much a feminine quality, to be able to care for everyone. Men have this in them too. And especially if they're raised in this way, to be able to be of this giving and mindful heart, right? And so that's why it's really very important to teach these very early on. And we understand that, you know, the very early formative years of living among women, because all male and female, the woman is the very first environment. The mother is the very first environment any human being learns how to live on this earth. Just as we as human beings are actually children on the body of our Mother Earth. She is the body upon which we live upon every day, even as adults. So we always have to be very mindful about how we treat our mothers, right? And so she teaches us lessons all the time. We are in one right now. This is a lesson. This is a lesson for us as humankind. And so Mother Earth has really taken this time to say, okay, kids, you're all on a big timeout, all of you, because you're not respecting me. And so that's what we have, right? As women, you have that authority, right? So as kids, you know, get older, you know, our societies can sometimes seem very gendered. So we have very sort of male, female, you know, gendered spaces. But I think because of colonialism and patriarchy, a lot of the history books have been written about us and tend to look at our societies as only gendered, and not recognizing that there was a lot of fluidity in that, and that women, if they wanted, could go be with the men could be with the women, and then there could be those folks who could be of different genders that could, you know, travel between the two. And so there was much more fluidity in that space in regard to gender. And so I think that that's really important to also note. So I think I want to also just kind of bring up some of the things of paying attention to time. Mom, feel free to jump in. I've shared a lot.
You're doing such a beautiful job, Michelle. Oh my gosh, you just make me proud. You're an amazing. It's wonderful hearing you again. I missed your presentations, but you know, the way that you described it, I'm sure a lot of people have recognized that, you know, the own United States government is fashioned obviously after the Confederacy. But also I'd like to add that, you know, as the politics has become the way that it has for the last 4 years, not to get political, but in our structure, there's never just one leader in charge. Tadadaho becomes the leader of all of the 6 nations, of each nation, not the sole leader. And I think that the colonists, as they formed, looked upon the men in that manner and totally lost sight of women completely, or never even recognized that it was the women behind our Confederacy that actually carried out what needed to be done. And it was the man's duty to see that this structure continued, to see that, to support it and nurture our matrilineal ways. And they still do today. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. You know, it makes me, you know, think about with the, you know, the role of our chiefs. They are to be the eyes and ears of the people. And they really take the direction from our clan mothers. And so I'm going to just throw something else in here for you to think about, is to think about, you know, you have your state and federal system, right? And within our confederacy, we have our clan mothers and our chiefs. And our clan mothers are there, you know, within, you know, our communities, and they're there taking care of their clan and really sort of tending to like the local matters, if you will, and helping to be able to, oh, we have a visitor. I have my 12-year-old son who wants to join us on this presentation tonight. You're live on Facebook. These are just the pleasures of all of us being home, right, during this time. And so it's a real gift. And so oh, as I was saying, so within, you know, our system, you know, our clan mothers are there, you know, taking care of, you know, the issues that are going on within the community. And she really has her pulse on what's going on, and really sort of helps to, you know, manage, you know, any type of, you know, issues that are going on. But then there are certain things that need to be, you know, brought to the attention of our chiefs. And our chiefs are there working together among, you know, all the nations of our confederacy, both internally and externally, and they will come together to be able to work on, you know, various issues that are going on and to addressing external issues. So the clan mother is there, and she is the one who's really helping to direct her chief, and he's listening, and he's to take her direction. And he's not supposed to act outside of what the direction is, right, for the people, because really then he becomes a representative of his clan, of his people within his nation. Does that sound familiar? Just curious, and you take a look at how the process works, right? And so, excuse me 1 second. Okay, so my son wants to come in and listen. All right, so yeah, so the chief is, you know, they're taking the direction from his clan mother, and really not, you know, deviating from that. And of course, obviously, he's there meeting with other chiefs or delegates from other nations, and, you know, doing the best he can to be able to make sure that he oversees and accomplishes what his clan mothers have set forth for him. And so when a chief acts out on his own interest, right, his own self-interests, and goes against the will of his people, his clan mother has the right to give him a warning. And she has the opportunity to be able to give him 3 warnings. And if he doesn't correct his behavior, she has the right to take him out of that position. So she's the one who, first of all, chooses him and gives him that title as a chief. But if he acts in his own self-interests and isn't listening to the people and receives these warnings, she has the right to take that title away from him and to give it to somebody else. So I love, one of our clan mothers talks about, you know, with the president of the US, and she would say, you know, what would happen if he had a clan mother, right? So especially what would have happened, you know, in the last few years, you know, if there was a clan mother for that leadership position. So now what's also interesting is that within the Haudenosaunee, among all of our nations, we have 50 titles. There are 50 chiefs and clan mothers who represent all of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Where do you see 50 representatives in your government? Okay. So I just want you to kind of think about this, right? And then decisions being passed back and forth between the different sides, right? And being passed over to the third side, right? So you can begin to see these parallels that happen. So when you really look at what is, you know, modern democracy, and you began to see that it's really centered in the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and our forms of governance, what was really, really essential to this form of government and why it works and how it operates well is the understanding that the women and the clan mothers are really, really central to this government and how it operates. And what has been missing within the US government? It's the role of women, right? It was deliberately left out. It was omitted. It was just erased. And women, thankfully over the last, 100 years and even more than that, have been fighting for your right to participate in government. And so I think it's not even about equals, but look beyond that and look to the roots of your form of government and how it operates or how it should be operating. And then you can begin to understand how true democracy and what the world has come to know as modern democracy. For us, we know it's not very modern, but how modern democracy really can be operating in that space of true equity, not equality, equity for everyone, where everyone's voices are heard. So I think those are some of the things that are really, really important to understand, especially when you're relating to, the lands that you're on. For those of you who are there within the Corning, Elmira area, is the acknowledgement of being on those Haudenosaunee lands and understanding that the land has had a language that has been connected to and speaking to the people for thousands of years, and that language is still very much alive and operating. And it's through the Haudenosaunee people that you can really begin to understand the landscape. You can really begin to understand the government and even come to understand your own government, right? And so as, through the process of time, some really wonderful things are happening and taking shape, and some really very hard and tragic things as well. But in order to really sort of find the core of this truth, you can really look to the Haudenosaunee people in terms of, the governance and the democracy that I'm speaking about. And so with that, I want to, open our space up for some conversation. Mom, I don't know if you wanted to add a couple of things in here.
Well, I just find it interesting on the top of the, is it the Capitol, that where there's a statue of a woman, and that we say is Jagunsa. But that was about all the acknowledgement that she got. I just wanted to add that in there. And maybe you'd like to share with them about the Seneca Falls monument going up in honor of women in Haudenosaunee. We're honoring a Haudenosaunee woman or an Oneida woman, Laura Kellogg, who I'm very honored to be a consultant on. And Michelle and I and the family will be flying out to Colorado to kind of finish up the details of her, which is exciting. I'm a sculptor by trade, and I think Michelle has a slide of it for you.
Thank you.
No?
I do. Yeah, I'm pulling it up right now.
Oh, there it is.
Okay.
Yeah. And
yeah. Do you want to explain? Do you want me to?
Go ahead.
Okay. So we worked on a project as consultants for the Congressional Women's Suffrage Centennial Committee. And they have these 4 women here that will be unveiled in public art, if you will, come this September. And so as you can see here, there's on the far left, there's Laura Cornelius Kellogg. There's Harriet Tubman, Martha Coffin-Wright, and Sojourner Truth. And so we were asked to be a part of the selection of a Haudenosaunee woman who would be represented within this monument. And that, we end up pulling together a committee of Haudenosaunee representatives, literally from our leadership, to community leaders, to artists, to PhDs and historians who came to work on this. And it was quite a process to have to select one woman, because as you can see, our stories consist of many, many women throughout time. But one of the really sort of unfortunate things that happened is Many of you might be familiar, but within the past few hundred years, the history with colonial settlers has not been really that pretty, and we can go as far as saying that there were acts of genocide committed against our people. And so there was really a push to assimilate our people eventually after a certain time when it realized that we weren't leaving the lands. And in that process, a lot of our own histories were erased, which is why you'll also be hard pressed to find some of the information that I've shared with you tonight. This might be the very first time you've heard these stories and about this type of influence. But it's there on the record. You just have to really, really, really search for it. And I implore those of you who are, within the space of education, to find this type of information and to bring it into your curriculums or into the workspaces that you work, and to be able to share this information more. So with that, in picking a woman to be a part of this monument, it was really very challenging because it's in Seneca Falls, and people would think that that's on Seneca territory, but it's actually not. It's on the Gayapono lands, which is the Cayuga Nation. And so we were trying to find a Cayuga woman from within that time frame, but because the records really don't, exist, and in particular in regard to Indigenous women or Haudenosaunee women, it's even less so, because the European settlers always wanted to deal with our men, thinking that the men were the ones who were in charge. So most of the history that you'll see has a lot of interaction between the European settlers and the colonial settlers and our men. They're the ones who you see more written about within history and less about. And so with that, we had to, search the record and find a woman from within that time frame of the women's suffrage centennial to be able to include her in this statute. And so we ended up picking Laura Cornelius Kellogg. She was an Oneida, still part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, but was someone who really was a very, very strong advocate for our land rights, for the revival of our languages and our way of life, and to be able to use that as our economies for our nations, and to be able to reclaim our lands. And she really spoke against the acts of the government that were very harmful to our people, and including residential schools. There is a really, really big history that's here that is so unfortunate that the American public really has no idea about. And that's really, really sad and really very unfortunate. So I hope that was some of the pieces that we share with you tonight, that you will look more into them. And Babatunde, certainly, you're welcome to, have us back. We can, sort of focus in on, some particular topics. But I just wanted to be able to share this. And so what you see here on the left is Laura Cornelius Kellogg. And what she's holding in her hands is what's called the Women's Nomination Belt. And this is one of those belts also made out of wampum that, like I showed you in the very beginning, and also that my mom talked about. But what the Women's Nomination Belt is talking about specifically that power that our clan mothers have to choose our leaders, and to be able to also take that power away if we need. And when I say leaders, I don't mean just the male leaders, but I'm talking about within our leadership, right? So, within our clan, families, each clan has a clan mother, a chief, a sub chief, and then two faith keepers, a male faith keeper and a female faith keeper. And so the clan mother is kind of really the one who's sort of like leading that space. And the chiefs are there to take her direction. And the faith keepers are the ones, just like we said, who are there to help keep the faith of the people, and to be able to, keep our ceremonial practices going, and promoting these ways of peace, and, centered within our great laws of peace. So there we go. So so with that, my mom, she is an artist, and you can see a lot of her you know, this sort of very feminine, women-centered worldview in a lot of the artwork that she does. I have also launched a online publication called Rematriation Magazine and Media. And so you can find us at rematriation.com. You can learn more about, you know, stories from our women's point of view. And then we also provide spaces for Indigenous women to be able to come and gather and to provide, you know, opportunities to have much more open, candid conversation with each other and focusing on healing from a lot of these, you know, historical traumas that have happened over the past couple hundred years. And so, yeah, so with that, you know, we're kind of at the top of the hour. We still have some time together. We kind of presented a lot of information. It often feels like we're literally like have a fire hose on, like, because we're talking about literally like, you know, trying to encapsulate, you know, thousands of years of, you know, creation in a very small amount of time. But to show you, you know, the cultural lineage that really exists, you know, among our people and within how we live, and also to recognize how, you know, for the American, you know, public to see that your government is actually really sort of centered in much of these principles, and most people are really unaware of it, which is really unfortunate, because there's such beauty that's there. And I know that a lot of people have a hard time, you know, wondering, you know, whether this modern democracy or American democracy works, right? But we actually know that it does and that it can. And so if you're talking to a people that have had, you know, over 1,000 years of peace and being united, there's something really special there that's worth examining, and examining the roots of what's called this modern democracy today.
Michelle and Diana, that was a beautiful presentation. As you said, that's information that you're never going to learn in a social studies class at in your high school or your elementary school. So I really appreciate that. So now I want to bring in Rita Schauger. Rita is part of Corning Incorporated. She joined Corning Incorporated in March 2000 and began the role of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Coordinator for the Office of Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with the Human Resources Function. In 2001, Rita established the Native American Council Employee Resource Group. She's also co-founder for the ADAPT, Abled and Disabled Partnering Together Employee Resource Group, established in 2013. She's also a member of the Mohawk tribe of Okashoni, Wolfman. And please, Rita, if I pronounced that incorrectly, please correct me.
I will.
The Mohawk tribe is also a part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. So I'd like to welcome Rita to do our little discussion. And please, if you have questions, put your questions in the chat, and Rita and I will ask the questions, or we'll just invite you to come online and join us and unmute yourself. So Rita, thank you. And please, can you make sure, please pronounce correctly the name of your clan?
Yes, I'll tell you. So first, thank you so much for having us tonight. Also, big Nyawe for the Thanksgiving address and the land acknowledgement. So nice to begin to see those really come into Sego Stanakoa. I'm Rita Lazor Schauger. As you said, I am a member of the nation at Akwesasne. I'm a Wolf Clan member, and very proud to be able to be here tonight with our two special guest speakers. I just wanted to talk really quickly about things that are happening in the world and the challenges that women are facing. So with that thought in mind, you know, thinking as a Native American woman, you know, maybe Diane and Michelle, you could just, you know, talk about, do we still have as much power as we used to? Or is there less in this country?
Michelle, or you want me to answer that? I honestly, ideally, that you bring up a very good point, because of, you know, the years of suppression and ongoing colonization, of course, and, everything of getting away from our original instruction so much. Yes, that Native women have now become almost a target that's unheard of, murdered and missing Indigenous women, which is rampant across Canada and the United States. And so the respect for women has been all but erased, lost, among, given the whole scheme of things. So, ideally, we should have as much. Do we? Not in all communities. There's a struggle of substance abuse, of racism, of, the murdered and missing. There's just so many different elements that come into our territories and our homelands now that it's a struggle. It's a struggle for our people to maintain who we are as Haudenosaunee people and as Indigenous people. It's a struggle every day. Some communities are very staunch longhouse. Some communities have 2 or 3 longhouses. So it certainly becomes a watered down version in many communities. However, we have been given the prophecy, and they say that our confederacy will all but fall, and it'll be the young that'll save it and bring it back up. So that's why in our teaching it's so important. We're an oral tradition, so it's so important that our young people go to Longhouse, that our young people are taught these teachings. This is how we're going to make our confederacy, uplift the confederacy again. Is going to be through our young people, our children, and they've become so important to our survival right now as Haudenosaunee people. I'm just going to add to that, Michelle.
Well, I think one of the other things too, is that the recognition that there actually is like a very big, there's been a cultural revival that's been going on since like within the 60s and the 70s. And it's really growing. And right now, I really believe it's because of what's going on around the earth with climate change and the way that we've treated our Mother Earth, that there is really right now a really big movement that's happening among Indigenous women around the world. And it's really grounded in our relationship to Mother Earth, because women are so connected to that life-giving force of the earth. We're the first ones to really sort of sense and feel what's going on. And so it's, again, like going back to what I was talking about with the language of the land, it's the women from those, those spaces where they're really connected. We're really connected to that land, and Mother Earth, speaks to our people and speaks to all human beings. Actually, it's just who's listening, right? And so within a lot of our cultures, we've kept that connection to the earth. And so what you see right now is this sort of really big movement among Indigenous women to speak on behalf of Mother Earth and speak on behalf of our waters. And when you look at the histories of colonial, settlers and the history there, you can see, this is a whole other discussion unto itself, but when you look at, what, gave Europeans the right to come here, it was called the Doctrine of Discovery. And that is, created, by the Pope. It's a papal bull from 1493 that said that European settlers can, come to the Americas and claim the lands in the name of their kings, because of the fact that the inhabitants of the Americas were deemed not to have souls because we weren't Christian. And so therefore we could just be done away with very easily. We could be enslaved, we could be murdered, we could be raped, any of these things, and then just kind of moved out of the way. And then the land was called what's terra nullius, which means it's open, there's nothing there. And so that's how you see the claiming of these lands here in the Americas. But who was really in the way of that settlement? When you really sort of break it down, it was Indigenous women who were in the way of that, quote unquote conquest or claiming of lands. And so when you look throughout history, Indigenous women specifically have either been silenced or murdered. Like my mom was talking about the issue of missing and murdered. That's been going on for hundreds of years. I'm so sorry. I have a little dog that found something to bark at out there. I'm going to go quiet her, but Mom, you can finish that one.
Okay. Well, I think what Michelle is getting to is, as she's talking about the movement of women and the Haudenosaunee women, for example, the magazine Michelle created, Rematriation, as part of that, bringing the sacred back to the mother. That's part of that's part of that movement of who we are as Haudenosaunee women, and the sisterhood that has formed, and it's been just an incredible resurgence of Indigenous women, which is really, really incredible to be a part of. I don't know, Rita, if we answered that or kind of touched upon.
Yeah, no, I think you did a great job. So in keeping with that idea, Native American history has been very suppressed. And either it's untold or only told on one side of the story. How can you help us to make sure that the stories remain alive, that they're continued to be told, especially Native American stories?
Yeah, well, I think, it's important to recognize, like, we have oral histories, right? And there has been this, perception that if you don't have a written history, it's not valid and that you can't rely upon it. And that's absolutely false. That's a big lie, and that's a myth that people have been told to really sort of, uphold Western, academia as sort of being the standard of which, everybody must sort of conform to. But really, there have been so many academics, scientists, throughout many of the past generations that have, well, I don't know how many generations back, but within the last few generations that have confirmed our oral histories as being absolutely accurate. And there needs to be that recognition that our stories are absolutely correct. They're told and they're retold and they're retold and they're retold, which is different than having a book that somebody might read once and then go sit up on the shelf, and maybe never touched ever again. But somehow, because you can cite it, it's valid. Whereas when you recognize the oral history that's repeated again and again and again, it passes from one generation to the next. And the more that you hear something, the more that it's recited, the more you begin to embody it and to, carry that history as well. So it becomes really important, that we as Haudenosaunee people continue to tell our stories to our children. But I think it also becomes important, for others who are, here listening to recognize that, this history that you're learning comes from many, many, many generations of telling the stories many times over. And so I think that that's, incredibly important to recognize. But again, like I said earlier, for those of you who are here, whether you're in academia or whatever professional space that you're working in, is to really begin to sort of incorporate these Indigenous perspectives and histories into your work. And you'll be really surprised in how many different ways that they can fit and how they bring value to the spaces that you live and work in. And I think that that's really essential. I think it's important to note that, New York State, I don't remember how many years ago, if it was like maybe 30 years ago, had completely dismissed a 600-page curriculum that was written by Haudenosaunee people about our history that was to be incorporated into the elementary schools. And they said it was too controversial because it was truthful. And so that curriculum still exists. It's there. We're waiting for some folks to bring that into, into the curriculum and take it beyond, so I don't know if everyone here is in New York State, but take it beyond fourth grade. Why should folks only learn about, Haudenosaunee people or Indigenous peoples only in the fourth grade? What do you remember from the fourth grade? What impact did that have upon you? And everything that I just shared with you, and my mom and I have shared with you this evening about, the truth about your own government, wouldn't that have served you very differently if you had learned a sort of deeper level dive of that, like say within high school and within college, right? And you carried that forward with you, it'd be a very, very different perspective. But these truths have been hidden, I think, because, at the end of the day, it really is that, it is about, the ego of a nation that wants to, and I that's actually the name of a film that just came out, which I think is great. But it's the ego of a nation that really sort of wants to claim its own identity, that it just sort of appeared, magically, and not recognizing, the influences that really played a part in its creation.
We
Thank
welcome
you.
that curriculum at Corning Community College. So you could please share it with us.
Wonderful. I love that. I love hearing that. Yeah. And there's so many wonderful references that are out there. A couple of them that I can recommend, are John Mohawk's book called Thinking in Indian. And then there's another great book. I have it right here. Let me see. It's this is a great one that you can look to, specifically, related to the stories of our women, but it's called A Clan Mother's Call. And this is by Clan Mother Wagalagutste, who is also known as Mama Bear. And this is put out by, SUNY Press. So I'm going to put that up there. So those are some really, really great, two initial sort of resources to look to. I saw also in the comments, someone had asked for a link to the video. Before we end, I'll copy and paste that and put that in there really quick. But it was from the Scano Center, which is in Syracuse. So you can find that resource online as well. But there are plenty of other books, but I think those are two really great sort of jumping points. Oh, and also one more that's I think also really, really important. This one is my late father-in-law, who is Chief Irving Paulus Jr. Gaha. And this is the name of the book. Who Are These People Anyway? And so you can see that's kind of what the cover looks like. So this is like literally just sitting and having having a conversation with him and hearing him talk. But those are my recommendations for some initial really great jumping points and deep dives into some of this, Haudenosaunee perspective and worldview.
Thank you for that. Can you, both of you, take an opportunity to speak about the significance of the confirmation of Deb Haaland to be the first in the cabinet as the Secretary of the and the importance of that?
Yeah. Mom, do you want me?
Well, on a personal level, I'm very proud of her and very excited for Indian country, because the BIA, to indigenous people is boss Indians around. BIA, that's how I was raised. That's what we call the BIA. So, it's nice to see an indigenous woman in there. And even though it's not my government, I'm proud of her that she's participating in that. And indigenous women are finally starting to show up on the periphery of the United States. Go ahead, Michelle.
Oh, I think it's also great. I mean, as the, that position itself is in charge of public lands and water, and within the bounds of, what's called the United States. And I think it's really it's very apropos that now an Indigenous woman, is overseeing that responsibility, because that is the responsibility of our women, is to oversee the lands and to oversee the waters. And so I think that's really wonderful. I think it's also really important to recognize that there is a very wide spectrum of folks, Indigenous folks across the country. Babatunde, I know you were talking about, there being tribes. And so For the Haudenosaunee, we call ourselves nations. We are sovereign, independent nations that pre-existed the United States, who acted independently even from each other, even though we're united as the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. But we have our own separate nations. And so there are many indigenous nations across all of the Americas. In some spaces, they do call themselves tribes. In some spaces, they even call themselves bands. And within the United States, there, is close to 600, federally recognized indigenous nations and tribes and bands. And that's not including those that are, state recognized, or even ones that the government, the United States government, decided to officially no longer recognize them as a people, which is really another act of genocide and very sad. So recognizing that we're really very distinct and different. And so, for the Haudenosaunee, we share a common culture and, governance and spiritual life ways, but recognizing that we are very separate and unique from, say, some of the nations that might be out west. And our cultures and our stories and our governing systems are very different, just as much as Germany and China are very different from and separate and distinct from each other. So I think that that's really important that people recognize that. So within that spaces, we all have different relationships with the US government. And for the Haudenosaunee, we have a number of treaties that predate the United States. And the United States, when it formed its constitution, stepped into the role of those European nations that created those treaties with us. And in the US Constitution, it even says that the treaties are the supreme law of the land. So we still uphold our end of our treaties, right? And one of those treaties is called the Two-Row Wampum Treaty. And the two-row, actually, which here is on the cover of my father-in-law's book, you can see there are these two purple lines, and then there's these three white lines. And the white represents what's called the River of Life. And the Haudenosaunee created this treaty with the Dutch in 1613. And it says basically that, we will travel along this River of Life side by side as brothers and sisters, right? As siblings, as relatives, and that we agree to never interfere with each other and each other's, way of living. And so as the Haudenosaunee, we still stand within that position today. So you will see there actually are a lot of Haudenosaunee people, and as a Haudenosaunee Confederacy, do not participate in the US governance, in the governing systems, right? So, don't vote, right? And some of our nations have for many years just withheld and not taken, federal dollars that have been allocated for tribes, right? And so you see that it's the recognition we're the sovereign nation, right? And then you have on another spectrum, you have some other tribes that also, are sovereign as well, but have a different type of relationship and participation within the US government. So you do have, indigenous folks, throughout, the United States that do participate in the US government, that do vote, that even run for positions. As you can see in the last, several years, there have been indigenous Congress, women. And now we have Deb Haaland, who, is sitting within this position of, as Secretary of Interior. And so the way that I see things now is that we actually need that type of representation across all those different relationships. Just as I said, it's important, whatever space that you work in, to bring that indigenous perspective in. And that's the same within government, right? So I think it's beautiful and appropriate that Deb now sits in this position, because you do need an indigenous woman's voice in this country to speak for the land and to speak for the water.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to be very mindful of time because I think we're very close to 7:30. Are there any last minute words of wisdom that you'd like to share with the people who are listening?
My goodness, I would like to say, give thanks every day. Give thanks every day for the sun coming out, for each other, for ourselves, for our families, for our communities, to just give thanks. Continue to give thanks. That's our whole Thanksgiving address. That's all of what our principles are based upon, is giving thanks and be loving and kind to each other. And start your day off that way. because it puts you in a good space, and that is contagious, and a contagious energy of love. So
Yeah. Thank you, Mom. Yeah, giving thanks is part of our way of life as Haudenosaunee people. And that's why we have the Thanksgiving address and we start our day with that. And in addition to that, one of the other responsibilities that we have that was given to us since our very early time as human beings is the recognition that we must always be thinking about the generations that we will never ever see them in the flesh here on earth. And so all of our actions today must be in a way that we think about them. And again, will they have that clean water? Will they have those seeds of food that will regenerate on its own and that will give our, future generations, healthy foods to eat? Will there be clean water? And, my father-in-law, it's funny that I bring up his book tonight, talked about the laws of nature. And he says, what happens when you get a speeding ticket, right? You have an infraction, you pay a fine, you're done. Maybe you commit, you get a DWI, and he would say, you spend maybe some time in jail, and then that's it, all done, right? And you can walk away from it, right? You broke the law, but you had a small fine, you paid it, and it's done. But what happens when you break the law of nature? What happens when you break the law of water? That's it. There's no more going back. And so we have to think about that because we are at that point in our humanity and our time here on earth to think about how do we live and what do we value? Every single day, all of our actions reflect our values. And our values need to be in a way to make sure that your great, great, great grandchildren and their grandchildren will be able to survive and to be able to have a life as good as you, if not better. So we have to think about that. So think about our Mother Earth, think about those future generations and how we live. So I want to thank you all for coming together this evening and for being here, and just want to wish everyone well and good health and to be in peace and to walk in peace. And so with that, Babatunde, I'll turn it back over to you and to Rita, and thank you. Now I go.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
Joy.
That was beautiful how you just ended that presentation. I'm very, like you said, I've been doing it more often. Every morning I get up is to give thanks. And, I don't immediately think about it, but throughout my morning, it comes up, me being grateful for everything that I have. Cause I just had a friend pass away. So you always remind you that, every day every moment you need is a blessing, and that we really need to, we really take advantage of and be grateful for every moments we have, people around us. So I want to thank you, really, really thank you for that message. I try to live by that. So thank you very much. And thank you to Rita for giving this time. I know it was very last minute that I reached out to you. I thought, having Rita will allow for a little deeper conversation. Because, me being kind of almost an outsider, I thought maybe having Rita would kind of bring a different connection with the conversation. So, so I'd like to thank everyone once again for participating in these discussions. These are all wonderful opportunities for us to bring awareness to each other, to be closer to each other, to enjoy each other's company and time together. And before we go, just want to remind you of a few things that we have going on this upcoming next couple of weeks. This Saturday, we have a paint and lunch event with Zoe Wernick and Philomena Jack at the Community Arts Center. People can buy tickets online to participate on that. You can find it on our website. The website is in the link. Next Wednesday and Thursday, we're celebrating women in STEM. So we have a few of our local women in the STEM professions that will be talking about their journey, what inspired them, who inspired them, and how did they get there, and kind of the obstacles and what we should be thinking about as far as trying to encourage and creating pipelines for our young girls and other youth to participate in the STEMs in general. All the information is on the website. And then on the 30th, Tuesday the 30th, we will have a Building Your Legacy workshop with Betta Mannix, and our special panel that's going to be moderated by Jen O'Hara, one of our faculty members. We'll have Stephanie Risley, who else there? Tiffany L.A. from the Corning Theater here. And I'm trying to think. And the last person was Anita Lewis from EOP. And then we have Pam, I forget Pam's last name, from Shimon Canal. Shimon Canal is actually sponsoring that event. So thank you to Shimon Canal. Once again, I want to thank you all for participating. This is a great discussion. I always, one of the things that I've learned in a lot of these discussions is I have a lot to unlearn, and a lot of learning to do. And I think that every day is an opportunity to learn more. And that's why I love these discussions and love meeting people like Diane, like Michelle, like Rita, and everyone here that's on this video call as well. So I wish you all the best and wish you all a great evening, and hope to see you all soon. Hopefully we can all collaborate with the Diversity Center at some point. So be well, take care, and once again, as Diane said, be grateful for every day we have. Take care, everyone.
Thank you again.